If your customer makes their choices after the final contract is signed, then typically you're using post-contract selections with allowances. Allowances are essentially placeholders that you can add onto your contract with certain buckets of money, and then later in the project, your customer can then make their selections within those allowance amounts. So let's take a look at how to set this up and then manage your selections within allowances. Let's start by creating our allowances in our job budget. In our budget here, I have already built out the base package for my kitchen remodel. Now I want to add some allowances so that I can have my customer sign the contract and make their selections later. So I'm going to just add in a new group and I'm going to call this allowances. Now you don't need to include these in an individual group for allowances. You could spread the allowance items throughout your budget, but in this case, I like having it all together. So here I have a new group called allowances, and then I'm going to add in individual cost items within that allowance group. So we'll click the three dots at the group level and choose plus cost item. And this one's going to be my flooring allowance. Great. And then I'll add in a couple more. Let's do another cost item. This one will be maybe my electrical allowance. All right, and then let's add one more. This one is going to be my appliances. Great. Now, as it stands, each of these allowance items is just a standard cost item in my budget. Now we need to convert them to allowance items so that they actually function as placeholders in my budget. So we'll click the three dots at the item level and then choose Show Details. Now, as always, we can add in our description for the item. We can choose the cost code. I'm going to make sure this is appliances and the type will be materials. I also can enter in my quantity for this, and in this case, allowances should typically just be one lump sum. All right. Now I'm going to enter in the cost for that allowance, and the cost is how much my customer has to work with in order to make their selections. So for appliances, we're just going to say that they have 11,000. All right. And now you can toggle on allowance item, and then you'll be met with a few other options. By default, you're going to see that this allowance item is a price allowance item. What that means is that you are going to be presenting the total price to your customer on the contract. Now, this might be a little misleading for them because they may think that they have $15,714 to spend. However, in reality, that includes your margin. So they really only have $11,000 to spend. And if you're wanting to use a price allowance, this is great if you're going to have a showroom and you've already marked up the items in your showroom at that 30% margin or 42% markup, and then you're eating away at the allowance amounts at the same level. Now, in many of your cases, you're going to choose that next toggle where you choose to show cost. What this will do is it will still incorporate your margin in, but it's going to present the $11,000 to your customer as their allowance they have to work with. Now, another note here is that you have an additional option called collect fee on overage. If I turn this third one off, this will just be a cost allowance, meaning that if my customer goes over the $11,000 with their selections, I will not collect an additional profit on the overage. So therefore, I'm only going to be making a specific amount of profit on up to $11,000, and if they go over that amount, they are just paying the cost overage. Now, if I do want to collect a profit on the overage, I can turn on that third toggle, which means that then if the customer goes over $11,000 with their selections, they will then be adding an additional fee, which will tack on an additional 30% on the overage so that you make an additional profit from that overage. All right. So in this case, we're just going to leave this as a cost allowance, and I'm going to close that out. Now let's go ahead and do that with the other two. So I'm going to click the three dots, show details, and now I can enter in the cost code. This will be electrical, and then the type is going to be materials. And we're again just going to do quantity, one lump sum. Nice. And then maybe I have a specific cost for this, and it's going to be, let's say, $300. And now you'll see that I can turn on allowance item and I can choose to show cost. Maybe I do want to collect a fee on that overage. Great, we can leave that on. Now we're going to close that and we'll do one more, and here will be for the flooring. So we'll choose show details, and now you'll see that I can choose my cost code in here, flooring, and I can choose my type, materials, and we also want that quantity of one lump sum. Now again, for flooring, I might want to put in a specific cost of $2,300, and I'm going to make this an allowance item, and I don't really have a showroom, so I don't really want that to be a price presented to the customer. Again, I just want to make sure that I am, in this case, collecting a fee on the overage. So we're going to leave this one as cost and fee as well. All right, so let's close that out and we'll save our changes. Great, so now I have these 3 allowance items on my budget. Now at this point, I have to add them to a document in order to create those buckets of money that my customer can then make their selections against later on. So let's click plus document, and we're gonna just create a proposal for this job. So we'll choose our proposal template, which is a customer order. And now I do want to include my base kitchen and the allowances in it, so we'll click create. Wonderful. Now here we have our proposal document. We can also, of course, choose the level of detail that we're showing in here. And you'll notice under allowances, it is showing the price to the customer. And because we have a cost or cost and fee allowances, we can choose to hide the sub-item totals, and this way it will show the customer what they have to work with, and therefore it's not as misleading for them and they know what they have to spend on these items. Okay. That looks great to me, so let's go ahead and save this and we will send it off to the customer. Wonderful. So now the customer will review your contract. They know that they're making their selection choices later on in the process, and so now they can scroll to the bottom, and let's pretend that we are the customer and they're going to sign. Great. All right, now let's check out what happened on your end now that that is signed. First and foremost, we can view back in the budget that we do indeed have a budgeted cost or an approved budget for the job. And so everything that was on that contract is now approved as money that can be spent. Additionally, we can go to our selections tab and we'll see that we have buckets of money for each of our allowances. And this is where we can start to add our selection options within each of the allowances that our customer can then choose later on in the project. Now, if you have any questions about allowances with selections, please contact your success manager or email support@jobtread.com, and we will be sure to help you out.